Thank you all so much for participating and or attending this interview event. So as you all know, over the summer and the spring, I inadvertently curated this TinyWorks project, which just came about from composers wanting to write short works, and it just developed into 3 albums and a whole bunch of premieres. And it was amazing. At least it was an amazing journey for me. It definitely challenged me to be able to put music together pretty quickly, but also be very like spontaneous with interpretation and with colors and sounds. And it also allowed me to get to know a plethora of composers who I otherwise would not be acquainted with. So it's just been amazing, and I want to thank you all for those who wrote pieces for this. And yeah, so I wanted to kind of like do this tribute Zoom thing to get to know some of you. Some of you I'm already acquainted with. Some of you I haven't met in person yet, but I want to take time to get to know you all as composers and to once again sing your pieces. Erich wrote a piece for me, 4 is 4, for the third TinyWorks album. And he is a really incredible composer who does a lot of multimedia work and interdisciplinary work with his composition. And so, Erich, can you tell us a little bit about your musical upbringing?
Sure. So I think it actually sounds like I might have a similar experience to some people here. I didn't ever formally study music until I did a master's degree. Through maybe when I was 12, I started doing guitar lessons. I played jazz band on and off. But when I went to do my undergrad, my bachelor's was actually in Russian language and literature. And during that time, I was doing experimental electronic music. I was playing in rock bands and stuff, but I never really formally engaged in composition probably till I was like 23, 24. And because of that, I think it's been a really weird struggle, because not maybe even a struggle, but just trying to go and find like where I fit in this world and trying to negotiate what like art music means right now. A big thing for me, even besides coming up with music through my childhood, is actually probably more visual arts. My parents are both graphic designers or illustrators. So I was always really encouraged to do art as a child, and not so much music. So I have a lot of art training, and I do a lot of visual, like probably video work right now. I think a lot of that stems from there. But the way that I actually ended up approaching music was coming at it from very internalized visual angle. So a lot of the ways that I work with it tends to be coming from like, would I turn this image that's in my head into music or sound? So, but besides that, like, I've been playing music for a long time. It's just when it comes to like, I just completed my master's probably about a year and a half now ago. So really, that's been like the only formal academic portion of it in my life.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. It's kind of liberating in a way to, not have to formalize, any sort of training until later. It's much more room for, being able to interpret what music art means for you and what not. And I've also been thinking a lot about like how like in piecing like visual art and music together, just like the whole concept of like how do you like bring like an art form that is like it's not time based, and how do you like add time to it? How do you add like, I guess, motion in that regard to it? I think it's like really, really interesting. So to move on, I was reading your artist statement in preparing these questions, and first off, your artist statement is like a masterpiece. You all should look at his artist statement and his website in general. And also Erich helped me with my own artist statement. Thank God. So what I loved about your artist statement particularly was your thoughts on surrealism in your music, and approaching art music from the sides of grotesque and strange. So how do these concepts manifest themselves in your artistic identity and in your compositional process?
Yeah, I think for me especially, that artist statement and that whole identity of what you just described is still evolving, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what that means for me. But for me, it kind of stems back to the fact that like the music that I gravitated towards was always, when it comes to like, again, like art music, it's the things that were kind of on the fringe or edge maybe until more recently. So it like the composers that I gravitated to before I even started studying music were people like George Crumb or like Glenn Branco or Henry Cowell or Cornelius Cardew, people like that might be, they're still within the realm of like, you know, the avant-garde, I guess, but they're not Beethoven, they're not the formal people that you might be looking at. And I really only came to appreciate like traditional classical music very lately, all things considered. So when it comes to writing music and kind of coming at it from that end, I think at the core of what I want to do, there's this idea of spontaneity. How do I get my music to sound like it's not coming from this tradition? How do I get it to sound like it's coming from like punk rock or jazz or another variety of sound where it doesn't feel like it's coming out of a museum? For me, that's really important because right now, I, like I love a lot of the pieces, but also I can only listen to it for so long without it kind of feeling monotonous. That idea of having a live show as a live show and not feeling like it's something that we would want to go and like overly dissect piece by piece, and having that level of energy is really, really important for me. So that kind of goes into where I come with like the grotesque and the strange. It actually comes back to a few years ago. I discovered I was really looking into the Surrealist Manifesto of Andre Breton when it came to the formalization of the Surrealist movement. And in this PDF, it's PDF now, it's not free online. I recommend it for anybody who wants to check it out. It goes through the actual beginnings of Surrealist creation technique from a literary standpoint. So it talks about stuff like automatic writing, talks about collage, a few other techniques. So for me, I wanted to start experimenting and I wanted to think about how to go and really translate those concepts into the music that I write. And a lot of it, I mean, I think it blends very directly, and a lot of it's not new, it's not novel. It's stuff like how do you go and do structured improvisation in art music. It's how do you go and like, or finding ways to like do collage, which actually the piece that you're going to be performing, Stephanie, for me is very much in this style. It's taken from it's collage literary elements and music clippings and all these different things thrown together. So it was really made with that idea of like that level of strangeness in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And like even besides that, like I said, the people that I'm really drawn to in terms of who I like or who I want, not even to emulate, but just who I admire as musicians, the music they make, it's not traditionally pretty. So and I never really try to do that anyway. So it kind of just lends itself, and it's definitely like a never-ending circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, that resonates with me a lot. I find the most liberating music. I mean, I like to sing, you know, classical and contemporary and a lot of things, but I find that music that is sort of like a collage of different sounds, different styles is extremely liberating. It feels physically liberating for the voice to be able to like shift in registers, and for the ear, yeah, the spontaneity is there, and it's just like you're always like surprised and inspired, and it's a really exciting place to be in as a listener, you know. So yeah, so I find that really, really fascinating. So do you have any projects that you're currently working on? I know that's like a weird question in a pandemic, but I don't know.
No, there's stuff going on still despite the pandemic happening. Like I mentioned, I'm up in Montreal, so the scene might be a little bit different depending on where everybody's tuning in from. I know, so up here there's a university called McGill, and they have a lab. The acronym is Kermit. I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's an experimental electronic music lab that deals with the creation of new instruments. So they're really big into doing gestural controllers for electronics. So I was working with them before the pandemic happened. Then everything shut down, and I've been gradually working on this other piece for this lab with a new gestural controller, where it's this box called a Guitarmy. And what it is that you stick it onto the top of a guitar, then it does gestures, and based on like how you tilt the guitar, it sends the signal into basically like a pedal box, and it does time-based reactions to what's happening. So it's like you can do granular synthesis with like based on how you're tilting it and a bunch of other stuff. I'm not sure if they're doing the rainbow connection synthesizer. It sounds like something they would do, but like, yeah, for Ian who's asking that question in the chat. Yeah, that sounds like something that might happen. But anyway, I'm writing a piece that I'm going to perform on electric guitar for electric guitar with this gestural controller plus 2 VCRs and 2 televisions. I'm doing a VCR fixed media piece with it as well. Then the other things I wanted to go and plug, there's this clarinetist Ford Forquin, who
I know him.
yeah. So we're doing a project together coming out sometime in January or maybe early February, where we're writing pieces for each other. He has another gestural controller that he can attach to the horn of his clarinet. Based on that, it's a similar idea. So we're gonna write some pieces together for these different ideas. And then Hannah Donnelly, the flutist, also I'm working with her on a collaboration in addition to the composers Taylor Arnold, Michael O'Callaghan, John Jansen, and Hannah's writing for herself a collection of flute pieces based on the events of 2020. So that's also going to be premiering in the next, probably early next year.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing, and that's a lot. That's so awesome that you have the energy and the inspiration to do all that.
I mean, it's coming back. It's definitely been a slump for a little bit, so it's coming back.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Well, I'm gonna move on, but thank you, Erich, so much. This is super cool.
Thanks, Stephanie.
So next up is Nicole DeMaio, who we met when she was based in Boston, and now you're in New Jersey, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm living in Jersey City right now. Sorry, the sun shifted midway, so I'm gonna fly over, else no one will see me at all.
Cool. So, can you tell us a bit about your musical upbringing?
Yeah, of course. So like most other Americans, I started on clarinet when I was in elementary school. Participated in music all throughout public schooling. I added on saxophone in high school as well. And I decided at the end of high school, I had actually taken a theory class that involved some writing and arranging, and I really started to like writing music as well. So I decided to get a music degree. I went pretty local. I went to Montclair State for my undergrad, and I started as a music education major there, added on a composition major as well. And I actually had a few upperclassmen friends who grabbed me right away, and they said, hey, so you play clarinet and saxophone already. You should pick up a flute and a bassoon and do doubling for musicals. We were so close to New York, so it made a lot of sense. So I started to do that. So I've been playing shows, musicals my whole life because of that advice I was given then. So I kept doing all of that. And I decided when I finished up at Montclair, I really wanted to dive more into composition formally. So I hopped up to Boston at Boston Conservatory. And I did 2 years there for a master's in composition as well. And I think in Boston, one of the biggest things for me was that was where I also started the group that I run now, Black Sheep Contemporary Ensemble as well. So that was kind of the biggest thing that happened for me there, just meeting people who are very like-minded, really excited about new music, and we're able to build that together. And then I came back, actually I stayed in Boston for a few years. I actually got my first real teaching job there, and I was teaching at Boston College High School for a few years, still writing music, still playing shows that whole time. And as most times when there are budget cuts at schools, the arts get cut. So my job after a few years there no longer existed. And I took that opportunity to come back to New Jersey, and I'm actually in a degree now, a multiple woodwind performance degree at New Jersey City University. So I'm doing that back here. And I guess most recently, I was on the national tour for An American in Paris. And of course, COVID cut us short on that in about mid-March. So kind of just a mix of all of those things. So just trying to always in some way be teaching, writing, and performing. Obviously, there are some months where I don't, write a single piece of music, or, maybe I don't have students, it rotates and things like that. But just a big mix of those three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think the amount of things that you do is like one of the things I really, really admire about you, just like your talents as a multi-instrumentalist and as a composer and someone who has curated and performed in interdisciplinary format too. I just love that creative side of you. And I think that Black Sheep is a really fantastic celebration of that. Your ensemble's done some pretty incredible work, and particularly with dance, which I enjoy. the piece that you had with the 3 clarinets and 2 dancers was so cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I know you've done movement stuff beyond like that one piece. How has movement inspired you, and how's that affected your compositional voice and performance?
Yeah, so I got into doing movement at first. It was actually a part of my master's at Boston Conservatory that I did that piece, Flock. I had met a really great dancer and choreographer, Micheline Wu. At the time, we had done some work on some theater stuff together, and I said, hey, I want to do something in my recital that would use some dancers. Could you choreograph something? And it went from her choreographing to her saying, maybe we have the dancers interacting with the musicians, to let's actually get the musicians moving. And there's this really fine line between saying, oh, we're, musicians who are dancing, because I'm not a trained dancer and I would never say that I am in any way. But being able to move, I mean, that's something we all experience in general. Without any training, we move to exist. So trying to incorporate that type of movement into the music that I was writing. So I think we spent like probably 40 hours in the studio just really coming up with all of the material for that. I think it was like a 10-minute piece in the end, but it was a really great experience. And we kept working with Micheline afterwards, with Black Sheep as well. So I've always really liked the idea of interdisciplinary collaboration. Just really, as a composer, for me, I'm not the type of person who wants to kind of just, write a piece, hand it off, and it's kind of, just like this singular process of each step of it. I really like it to be more involved. More of a conversation, and that was what I really got from working with dancers as well. It's crazy how we can be talking about the same thing, like the same piece of art or whatever, and the language is so different between that dancers will use inherently, or visual artists, or whatever it might be. And I feel like that's actually what I've taken the most into my own compositional practice, is just learning how dancers create. They don't write anything down. There's no like choreography book that they have, of we do this and this and this, but our scores are so heavily notated. Every single detail of what we do is always written down. So it's been interesting to kind of work with all of these dancers, because I don't always write everything down. Sometimes the musicians will just get a set of instructions or a prompt, or sometimes little scraps of paper that just have suggestions on them, things like that, because it works better for it to be more fluid with these dancers. So obviously a lot of improvisation has come into my work. And I think that's also a tough thing as a composer to kind of allow as well, just these large sections of it's not your music, it's the performers being a part of it. But I think that's what I've really liked, is just seeing how unique a lot of my pieces that I have that are more prompts or things like that, how they get interpreted by dancers, by different musicians, and what they bring to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's super amazing. I feel like I experienced a similar thing when working with a dancer recently with Anne Goldberg Baldwin, and yeah, I'd had that realization. I was like, she's not writing anything down. And
it's terrifying almost. We're so used to it. We want everything tangible, like right there, and they're just like, no, we're just going with it.
Yeah, no, it's crazy how like flexible dancers can be with that sort of thing. They just sort of like figure it out and just like kind of express through that that field of just not expecting like everything to be quite notated. And in a way, as a musician, that can also be beyond terrifying. It could actually be really liberating.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm gonna take a left turn here. Now, looking at your website, I was also looking at your ongoing project, Solo Alone, which is a collection of works you've written for singular instruments. And as someone who often sings by myself, I have a huge fascination with this. And I think it's just the entire sound world of, going from like silence to sound, sort of like as a call to arms in a way, just creating this atmosphere. I think it's something that's brave and exciting. So since you've composed a lot of unaccompanied pieces for different instruments, how do you think, if at all, this project has affected your compositional voice?
Yeah, so I've written, I'd say about like 5 or 6 different pieces for individual instruments, and it started out of kind of just more of a necessary need as a composer. It's easier to get a piece with only one performer performed than putting together an ensemble. So I kind of just said, let me write some solo pieces just for that reason. But it's actually been some of the most challenging pieces I've written. It's so hard to work with, especially a monophonic instrument. It's piano can stand on its own very easily, but when you have an instrument like a violin or a clarinet or something, it becomes completely different in that. So it's been a lot of, again, a collaboration with the people who are performing these. So like when I wrote the one for double bass, I was working with Patrick Fowler for his master's recital. He premiered the piece, but we went back and forth a bunch of times, just kind of really getting into the nitty gritty of what do you love that your instrument does? What do you really hate? What do you think is underutilized for your instrument? And kind of creating that conversation back and forth, especially for the instruments that I don't play myself as well. So it's really become this nice tool to get to know an instrument and a musician, kind of like an ongoing, like almost masterclass or a series of lessons with them. So I've really taken that, and it's also just difficult to find ways sometimes to create interest in a piece. So I find that's been the biggest kind of exploration that's still ongoing. I don't have an answer yet of how to make one voice always sound interesting. That's kind of been the biggest thing for me, is learning from that. How can you make one single instrument or one voice, work independently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that conundrum is something that like performers feel as well when we have to sing or play by ourselves. It almost feels a bit like jumping off a cliff. And yeah, to like make oneself interesting is definitely a challenge for sure. But yeah, you met the challenge so beautifully with your piece Going for me, which I'll sing in a bit. It's an amazing work. But yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. This is great. All right, next up we have David Howell, who I met through Twitter through this project. He's from the UK, and he's extremely kind and articulate on especially writing for the voice, on being an autistic composer, and on performer composer consent. Which I think we're going to talk about in my questions that I have for him. But yeah, David. I've learned a lot through not only collaborating with David musically, but just having conversations about art and music and singing. It's been really great. So David, can you tell us a bit about your musical upbringing?
Yeah, it's really, the story is a lack of it. I was as a kid, as an autistic kid, I found myself struggling a lot with like music class was one of the ones I dreaded, because it was cacophony of your hand percussion and whatever else we've had around the music classes. And I was in a special ed school in my until I was 11, 12. That year, my age 11 year, was my transitional year, where I sort of gradually moved into mainstream education. But for the most part, like, I never grew up with like a musician family. I think my mum did play clarinet for a bit, and my granddad played piano a bit, but it was a bit. I never really threw myself into it, and I'm glad for that, because if I had, I would probably have like got to a point where I could play something, and then we did an ensemble thing, and it was like massive overload from all the, especially if it was like I'm so glad that Britain doesn't have the American band tradition. It barely has the school sports tradition, to be honest. It's like not a thing, like because professional sports, like, they get people as teenagers and say that there isn't a school sports background in that respect. A little bit for rugby and a couple other sports, but I digress. It's if I'd been like in a band and so on, I would have been completely thrown off music. And thankfully, I was able to very much explore on my own terms. But I stopped school music lessons at after the equivalent of 8th grade, which is the last point they're compulsory under the English education system. And when my final music report actually said David has a good musical talent which you ought to pursue. And I did have a songwriting project in that, which I really got into, especially the text writing, and I like playing with text and melody and playing with it. But I never imagined myself as a musician, because I couldn't play instruments, and because of being ill-coordinated, and my sensory processing was terrible, so I would have necessarily wanted to. And then when I was 16, I've moved to a new school, because 16 is the main British leaving age, and then there's 2 more years before university, and then you which most people go to, but I went to a new school then, because my school was 11 to 16, and I went to a new school, and it was a coach journey of about 8 miles, and we went a long way round to stop at rural villages, and I was singing along to Avril Lavigne on the radio and on the MP3 player, this early little stick MP3 player, like 64 meg RAM, and I would sing along and impersonate Avril's twangy Canadian voice, and people really liked it, which is weird considering I was basically doing this as sensory soothing, as stimming, to deal with the overload of a crowd, the bus of everyone being noisy. I would sing all of it, and then whenever it played on the radio, everyone would ask me to sing, and I did. And then there was a concert that school, well, a sort of a variety in which that school then did for their to tie in with a British telethon. And I was, people suggested you should do the album thing, and I did. And they built it up so much, like I got together a band, it wasn't difficult to play, and they introduced me with dry eyes and everything, and it was completely weird. And I was dressed up in this ridiculous drag outfit I got from a charity shop, which in retrospect was probably kind of misogynistic, but I found myself really getting into the performing aspect on my terms. And also I met a couple of actual singers there, and I got into it because I'd also started thinking about singing, and I was starting to write because in weird edge case around weird British educational systems at that point, I was kind of doing the same thing in 2 different subjects for 2 different types of qualification. And in the second of those where I was doing different things, I started writing some song lyrics and typical teenage angst stuff. And that sparked a kind of autistic special interest, which is still going on. And I met a bunch of singer friends on LiveJournal. I'm still half in touch with 1 or 2 of them, actually. And that led me into New Music Twitter, and I just tried doing things. But what really is, it's a very strange experience, but I'm just glad that I was able to do things completely on my terms, even though it's limited in terms of scope of what I do. I'm told I do what I do well. I roll with my instincts, and I roll with my own autistic way of being.
That's amazing. That's incredible. I mean, that's like such a powerful place to be, to have like this autonomy over your artistic voice and just doing what you want and trusting your instincts. When you were mentioning the thing about band and not liking band, the first thought that came to mind was sort of my struggle with standard operatic repertoire. And it took me a minute to to come to terms with no. I don't like a lot of this. I don't have to do this, but yeah, no, that's extremely admirable that your enjoyment of music, your use of Avril Lavigne is stimming, that finding your artistic voice through that's completely incredible. So can you actually talk a little bit about how autism has shaped the way you write music? You spoke a little bit about this, but I'm super curious to hear more.
I think the biggest things that I have is that my brain's wired to think about things in sort of a different kind of way, and I'll focus on getting things right. And I hate uncertainty, and one of the things that anyone who's I've written for will find is I always ask them all the things about their voice, and then I tend to actually start from that and focus on the specifics of what they can do, range, preferred tessiture, any issues with passage, and so on. And I think to myself, what can I do, what can't I do? Because I'm always wanting to put them in the best place to succeed, because I'm so conscious, and we'll get onto this later, I'm always so conscious of hurting people, but it's how can I not hurt people if I don't know what hurts them? and then the other aspect is obviously the sensory aspect. I'm particularly kind of fragile with high frequency sounds and harsh sounds and so on, which actually made me very nearly not participate in this, because while I was interested in what you had to do and the idea of this Tiny Works project sounded amazing, I also thought to myself, anything I can listen to that I could write for Stephanie is a waste of a Stephanie.
No.
And then that's why I kind of inquired. And I inquired about it because I thought, well, I've done this and I'm really interested. Let's see what I can do, and ask for things. And from what you said about the things you could do, and the thing, I'm very quickly established self. I can play about with atonality, given your ability to handle it, rather than the piercing highs that other people might ask you to make use of, which I would not be able to listen to. And I like when you answered a lot of things before I even properly asked them, I think my one follow-up question was, how high can you float? Because anything above that, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist. I do not want to hear anything that's too high for you to float. It will bat me. But I'm just thinking about putting these things together in my own way, and just telling individual stories also about the things they say in the context. And obviously, this one's a context of 2020, and what I built around that was a repeating text of insisting that things are fine, and then using atonality to kind of break that down and expose it as a facade, a lie that we tell ourselves, because we've a lot of us have been telling ourselves a lie. I wanted to use, and that was sort of the idea I had with that, and it's been different for other people. Like each of the collaborators, they've spoken about what they want. They like the idea of me writing for them, and then that's sparked me, how can I do that? So for instance, when I wrote a piece for Soprano Elizabeth, I made a point of she wanted to tell contemporary stories, and she spoke about playing with vibrato, which I was really interested in terms of the idea of vibrato versus straight tone, which I've always thought about because of my sensory issues with high overtones, making me possibly drawn to the kind of shimmery, vibrato sounds, while being very conscious about hurting people by insisting on it. And we sort of played about with like ideas of the stories could tell, and that led to creating a piece that was essentially sung from the perspective of Mother Nature complaining about what's been done to her creation. And that was a really interesting piece to write. I also had some very harsh sounds that stopped me writing for ages because I was overloaded workshopping it. But I've always been thinking to myself, I'm so scared of hurting people, but I really want to make sure that they're put in the best position to succeed. But I'm always thinking about these details. I'm not necessarily focused on the idea of, I don't really do harmonic things. It was never a thing I really learned. And I think I get a little bit impatient about thinking about how everything puts together. But I'm thinking about words and how melody serves that, and how all of these come together for that specific individual voice, and what it can do, what it can't do, what it's awkward at even. I've made a point of like portraying vulnerability sometimes by placing the singer over passaggio and softly, knowing that this will sound probably wrong, and I want that as kind of a word painting effect that isn't as damaging to the voice as, say, insisting on everything being straight tone soft C6.
Yeah, no, and I think that's like very, very astute, because then like the kinds of like techniques or sounds you employ, they have such intention behind them, like, being vulnerable, or like, whenever atonality has come, like in the piece you wrote for me, then it's like even more striking, because it's not just like a cacophony of sound or anything like that. It's like very, very intentional, which I find super cool. So yeah, I wanted to ask you one last thing about collaborating with singers. You and I have had some great conversations together, and what kind of vocal sounds were comfortable and not comfortable for either of us. And it led me to read a bit about your writings in previous interviews about vocal consent. And it also made me think about like the Fach system, which for those who don't know, it's like a classification of operatic voices. And if you're like a lyric colorateur, you sing these roles, or if you're a dramatic mezzo, you sing these roles. And it could be, those kind of classifications can be debilitating as well. So yeah, I think it's best to tailor things like for the singer, and I think it's very great that you do that, David. So yeah, I wanted to ask you more about I guess collaborating with singers, and this is very open-ended, like your experience with that, or how you've researched that, or come to how you think.
It's really weird. I'm sort of still learning as I go, but I've sort of ended up putting together a sort of a stock portfolio of I say questions. I tend to introduce them as questions, and they come out as more like a list of specifications, like what is your range, where are your passaggio, what things do you want me to emphasize, what do you want me to de-emphasize, and then I tweak it for different people. So for instance, if I'm writing for a musical theatre person, I'll ask about belting, and if I'm writing for a trans singer, I'll ask about if they have any identity thoughts regarding specific ranges or specific vocal qualities that they might want to avoid or be drawn towards for that reason. And I've thought to myself that I'm always thinking, how do I make the best use of this specific instrument to tell a story that fits this specific person? And it's and what I've always wanted to do is make sure that that actually works. And then sometimes that I've felt a lot of sympathy for people. I've had people think of myself as very empathetic, and I don't know if that it necessarily feels like empathy in my head, because I don't have the same sort of emotional reactions. I can be kind of stereotypically autistic, or I jump straight to big picture a lot of the time. Like when there was a terrorist attack in Britain during election season here in 2017, my first thought was not horror at how many people were dying on the scene, but how many people might die if it was if the right-wing government that would get re-elected probably from that got a bigger majority as a result and could enforce more drastic policy measures that would kill more people than that. So I'm always big picture thinking, and that makes me ask about, I don't want to hurt my singers, especially because I know, like, I know that the sounds that I might want to listen to, like soft floaty vocalizing for someone like Stephanie, or warm, cozy, really low stuff for a lot of mezzos, they get sexualized and over abused and taken to extremes that are vocally dangerous. And there was one bit where the recording that Stephanie did for the album had some vocal fry in it that I didn't specify, and I heard it and I was nervous because I was like, this is really interesting, but I'm scared of being seen for a bars for this. I don't want people to think, oh, David hurt Stephanie, and I didn't want to sound like that was my decision, because it wasn't. And then I liked it, and then as one of my friends put it, if it was going to hurt you, the damage would already have been done. And we ended up having this conversation. I know that the album notes ended up making a specific point. We ended up drafting the album notes that specifically said we didn't insist on this. This was ideas, and and this is always the emphasis on taking care of seeking consent on use of extended techniques, because people do say yes, and like people like you have a higher risk tolerance than me, which probably makes for an interesting reversal of expectations if you're having suddenly the composer's more scared than the performer. which and I think that's what I always want it to be, that way round, because then I'm not hurting people, but at the same time, sometimes, including with Elizabeth, when I'm not hurting other people, sometimes I hurt myself to make sure of that. So I've been trying to find collaborators that I can play about with that and about that self-consciousness. And I've got a collaboration with Maren Montalbano, which is looking really interesting in that regard, in that this anxiety about how people perceive me and what I might do with playing about with sounds that she has that get sexualized, her warm chest voice, and as a warm mezzo. And it's just like, but I'm always asking these details. And this, like, how do I do this? How do I do this? What can I do this? Should I do this? And that's the entire point. And we've actually put together text. Maren put together text in sort of converting words from our Twitter DMs into a poem. And I'm going to be setting that poem, and then she's going to be tweeting things and so on. But always the emphasis is on making sure that everyone feels comfortable with it. And what I'm trying to do is make sure that goes to me, and that's mostly shit affecting who I write for as well as why I write for, which is why I've got collaborators like Maren, who has a thing, and Annika Sokolowski is going to be singing something who's really embracing her low notes, because and that's what I want to hear from her, so I'm writing something for her that's literally in tenor range. And she's so excited about that. And in fact, in that process, I literally sent her a phrase of a work in progress that had the lowest and highest bits of the song in consecutive phrases, and asked her, try this in different keys and let me know which one's too low, and then the one above that, that's the one we'll use. It's like first priority, right, go as low as possible without going lower. And so yeah, I'm always focusing on trying to make that work in terms of working for both of us, and I'm trying to put myself forward without whilst being aware that it doesn't matter what I think. If other people are being hurt, I could never be that kind of avant-garde composer who runs over boundaries, but I'm recognizing the value of my own, and so much of that is about asking people what they can do checking the subset of things they can do that I want to hear from them, like Annika's low notes, or your interesting ways with pitch clusters that I could do, and avoid the things that might overload me, like your extension. And so that all that analysis in my head is sometimes very exhausting, but also exciting. And I think also singers appreciate how individualized the collaborations end up being, and the opportunity to just geek out about the voice, because autistic people get into their special interests, and it's like, someone's special interest is someone's autistically speaking about the special interest, and it's literally my business. So it's like, oh, this is awesome. We can have conversations about this, and I find that, and it's just incredible. And that's why I've tended to write for people who've had a classical background. It's like collaborations have fallen through sometimes because of singers who don't know exactly what their voice is, can and can't do, which is the main reason I mostly write for classical voices, because they let me know what I can do, and more to the point what they can't, in a way that a lot of people with a more instinctive kind of background that doesn't teach them to do these things, because for all that the FARC system is kind of weird and sort of a continuous discrete labeling, a continuous data, I put it, or it's just labels that don't always fit, and like, how do you define one and another, which I've written about in my blog. At the same time, people have, when you've got that as an existential question, you've kind of got to think to yourself, how can what can I do and what can't I do, are things that you have to think about purely on the sense of, this is going to define how you're labeled, what you sing, what you don't sing. And when it's like literally existential, like Stephanie Soprano or Stephanie Coloratura Soprano, as opposed to Stephanie Singer. And it's when you have that as literally self-existential, then that's really interesting. I've written for a couple of people who shifted from soprano to mezzo after I wrote for them. Wow. And that was a really interesting process, because like one of them, I kind of half saw it coming, but I felt it's not me to say, and I'm mostly thinking, well, it's like, well, she wants to be stretched higher because that's what she thinks she needs for what she's singing. So I wrote a soft floaty note that was on the edge of her capabilities for that, which she then later found she was better at doing when she wasn't artificially lightening her voice to be a soprano. And she always thought like, oh, I sung musical theatre, that's why I have low notes, and that's why, and that shit is thing. And so that kind of distorted how she sang and what she did, because she assumed something isn't. And when you got that kind of thing, I'm just thinking in terms of first principles. What's too high? What's too low? Where are you most comfortable? Where do things get wonky? What can I do with different voice qualities if you sing things other than bel canto? And all of that is kind of a songwriter perspective in many ways, in terms of like, I'm writing for an individual voice in the same way I would like write for myself if I sung more than I do now, because I'm thinking to myself like I can do this, I can't do that, and none of that matters about labeling. And so that's how you can get great pop songwriters with completely different voices, from Freddie Mercury to Bob Dylan.
Yeah, exactly. David, I'm gonna interrupt.
I don't blame you. We've had so much to say. We've got so much to say. This is me being autistic. I get into this.
It's totally fine, and there's so many nuggets that are like so fascinating what you've said. But thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Amazing to chat with you. All right, so here are the first three pieces. First is 4 is 4 by Erich Barganier. No! 4 is 4. She, we see no trouble to take fungus and clear and leak and shred him small. Sit down in good broth, half a bit worse. Bidwell is now in jail. Wait, trial by grand jury. She has been accused of Ave Maria, gratia
in its place, singing it was remarkable, very using a very pull, as shown listed in the diagram. If you think you are entitled to a money, then don't hesitate to call one Wiese. Modern industry has established the world marketplace. What's And next we have Going by Nicole DeMaio. Going, going, going. No, I don't want to go. Going, going, going. Going, 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 gone. No, 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 na na ni na ni, na na ni na, ne ne no, stay away, way, way, I don't really want to talk about this. Why can't you just leave me alone for a while? There's just so much going on inside my mind. How come every time that we get here, I feel so alone? How come every time that we get here, I feel so alone? How come every time that we get here, I feel so alone? How come every time that we get here, I feel so alone? How come every time that we get here, I feel so alone? How come every time that we get here, I feel so alone? All right, and now we have Everything's Fine by David Howell. I'm okay, everything's fine, nothing is wrong, don't worry. I'm okay, everything's fine, nothing is wrong, don't worry. I'm okay, everything's fine, nothing is wrong, don't worry. I'm okay, everything's fine, nothing is wrong, don't worry. I'm okay, everything's fine, nothing is wrong, don't worry.
Let's go to Kim Osberg. Kim, how are you doing today?
Good, how are you guys?
Good, good. Thank you so much
Great.
for doing this. So can you tell us a bit about your musical upbringing?
Sure. Yeah. I am originally from Wisconsin, and I'm from kind of a small town there. Almost everything's a small town in Wisconsin. When I first started getting into music, I think like a lot of US students, I was doing piano. But then I kind of happened to look across the hall at my piano lessons, and there was this teacher who was teaching harp lessons, and my mom saw me just absolutely drooling over this. And I started playing the harp when I was in like 2nd or 3rd grade. And so from there, I kind of ended up getting into percussion when I was in middle school and high school. And I never really saw myself as doing music full time when I was going through school. It just, I think especially being in the community that I was in, doing music professionally just wasn't really done. It wasn't really seen as like a normal stable thing to do. And so I kind of had my eyes on a lot of different things at that time. I was doing stuff with theater, I was doing stuff with history and thinking about being a lawyer or a journalist or an archaeologist, just all sorts of different things. And by the time I got to high school, I had this really incredible band director who took a big interest in the different kinds of music that I was involved in. And he encouraged me to apply to a composition competition that the local youth symphony was running. And I was in it. And so I knew a lot of the people in the symphony. And so I was thinking, like, what could I even write? Like, I don't even know how to start writing for like a whole orchestra. I've barely written anything at this point. And then it was kind of the first time that I really started paying attention in a rehearsal. I looked around and I just wanted to know, like, with the different pieces we were playing in the concert cycle we were in, like what made people excited about playing those pieces, what made the performers move more, what did the brass players seem to like, what made the violins like start smiling and giggling while they were playing. And I think it really made me see music in a different way. And it was something where suddenly, instead of just like, it's something I have to do as part of class and something that I'm just kind of following along and counting a bunch of rests in the percussion section, that it was really something that had the ability to move people and change people's mood and change people's way of feeling about each other and about like themselves. And it was just really powerful. And so I ended up writing a piece and it won the competition, which was super crazy because I didn't know what I was doing. I wrote like bass clarinet and bass clef, and like I didn't know what transposing instruments were, so it was kind of a mess getting ready for the performance. But after your first piece that's ever played is played by like a 70-piece youth symphony of like all your friends, like it's hard to go back to anything else after that. It's just nothing could compare. And I think ever since then I was really interested in writing the kinds of music that would be like that would be tailored to things that I knew performers would enjoy playing, and that really felt like something I was giving to other people. And so as I started going through school and I decided to pursue music professionally, I was also in a small school for my undergrad in Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. And so you couldn't write a piece unless you had the performers lined up ahead of time, because there was only like 2 tuba players or something like that. So you had to make sure that you had everyone. And so that really changed, I think, the approach that I had, because I couldn't just sit down and write a string quartet or write a piano trio and feel like it was going to get played. I had to really seek out performers. And so we ended up with all these really unusual ensembles, and I continued to do things with theater and creative writing, and that kind of resulted in me getting really involved in kind of like viewing music as this really personal experience. And so by the time I got to my master's program at Indiana University, which was just this huge change culturally from everything I had been at before, I think for me it was really crazy because I suddenly had all these resources available, and there was all of these different artistic collaborations that were already set up with other kinds of artists. And so I got really into interdisciplinary collaboration during my time there, and started doing stuff with filmmakers and dancers, and started doing sound design for the theater department there, and even writing some music that was played in an art gallery. And I loved the process of viewing how other artists like painted on time. And I think that seeing that dancers use gesture and time just like music does was really astounding for me, a really astounding realization. And that filmmakers use visuals, yes, but also things like pacing and mood and tone and how those things are established. And I think for me, it just really allowed me to view every composition piece that I was doing as like a completely separate project and a completely different way of approaching music. And it's just been a really awesome, fabulous, colorful, very varied journey.
That's amazing. That's like, what a transfiguration that you've like continually gone through. It's like learning how to like write music like for people to express to experience joy versus disciplinary stuff. It's just, wow, that's what an amazing tapestry. And the sort of like what I hear you saying about you tailoring to pieces for different people, something that like is very like saturated in the projects, especially like you're like commissioning for quarantine project, that the one that you did previously in the spring, and then the new one, what was it, Project 12 that you're currently doing. It just seems like it's not just like, you know, okay, it's the pandemic, I'm just gonna like do stuff. No, it just seems like each piece is like so tailored to instrumentalists, and the collaboration seems like so secure. And it, at least whenever you posted stuff online, it really does bring me joy. When I was reading a bit about these projects, wrote something about like pieces being written in short deadlines, especially for Project 12. Now, are tight deadlines something that you've always thrived on, or is it something that developed during the pandemic? Also, do you feel that this has changed the way you write?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like in school, things were always really stressful, and I always had a lot of writing projects going on, probably an unhealthy amount. And so for a while after I left school, I actually wasn't writing a lot of music at all. I was just trying to kind of get things established because I moved to Dallas having no like didn't know anybody, I didn't have any jobs set up. And then I think for me, I was really taking the time to kind of reevaluate what I wanted to do. And things ended up working out great there. I got into a bunch of different projects, but then I came here to Portland in January, and I had about a month and a half here, 2 months here before everything completely shut down. And so I had the great fortune to meet a couple of people here in town, including Drew, who was just a joy to meet. And I think that it's still been very difficult figuring out how to meet other musicians and meet other people in a brand new town when you can't go outside and you can't go to people's concerts physically and you can't get coffee. And I think those difficulties I really wanted to reach out to other musicians, and I knew that a lot of people were struggling with this loss, this incredible community that felt like it had been so totally torn asunder by the lockdowns. And I think that for me, creating projects that were not only accessible financially and also feasible to do in a short amount of time, something that could kind of give something for somebody to work on just in a short amount of time that wasn't very stressful, but then also to give them something that they could deal with, that they could work on right now, was really important to me. And so Commissions from Quarantine happened because I just wanted to get music into people's hands and reach out to people and kind of let them know that like this music making can still happen, and that it can still happen right now, even in the midst of everything that's going on. And I ended up doing close to 40 projects for that. A couple of them ended up moving into like bigger commissions. And so that was really great also, and just meeting all the different musicians. And it was also really interesting to see what people felt they needed during quarantine. You know, some people really wanted to have something that they could really sit in their feelings with and work through those feelings musically, and some people wanted a complete just opposite of anything that they were feeling, to just kind of an escapist kind of experience. And so with the Project 12 pieces, I wanted to do something similar, but something that I could spend more than just a few hours on at a time. So giving someone a full week just to work on their project and still give them something at the end of that week that we both can feel really good about. I think for me, it started out as a way just to kind of reach out to people and kind of see how fast we could get things put together and how many different people I could connect with. But I think one thing I wasn't expecting is that it's made me actually a lot more confident as a writer, because by having these short deadlines, I don't have time to question myself the way that I normally do. I can't strive for that like absolutely perfect solution that sometimes gets me to stop writing completely. And so I've been able to write so much more because I'm still thinking about these pieces and I'm still spending quite a bit of time on them, trying to make sure that I get them right. But it really does force you to view your music making in a way that says like, this is something I'm putting out there. I'm creating something that I'm going to do during this specific time, and anything else next week or the previous week or anything else is completely outside of like this creative zone that you have for yourself. And I think that kind of focus has been really helpful in building that confidence.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Yeah, and I can definitely, that resonates with me a lot, because when I was doing Tiny Works for Me, like, yeah, I didn't have time to question things. It was just like, all right, you got this score this morning, go, you know, and
learn it.
Yeah, and it changes the way we write music or sing music, and yeah, it's extremely liberating. I'm glad that you had that experience too. I'm going to take a left turn here, and I wanted to talk about your other some of your other projects, which, as you've mentioned from your upbringing, your projects also have this wide range, including dance, film, environmental sound installations, instrumental theater, plays, opera, visual art, award ceremonies, and stage combat. I'm really curious about the stage combat. But can you speak a little more to the interdisciplinary work? I know you spoke about it before, but I want to hear more about that.
Right. I think for me, one of the things I love about composition is that every day is different. It's not like going into the job I had at the bakery at a Kroger where like every single day you're doing the same thing. And I think for me, I really thrived on just interacting with the way that other people approach art and the way that other people's vocabulary, that kind of difference in vernacular has always been really interesting to me. And I always am really excited to let that make an impression on my own music making. I think one of the best examples of this was when I was in Dallas, the Dallas Contemporary, which is the contemporary art museum there. They were going to be doing a concert and exhibit kind of event of the works of this man named Ian Davenport, who's a British artist. And he does all of these like very abstract, very interesting kind of series of works. And so his display at this art museum were going to be these high gloss paintings that were these really straight lines with like very vibrant colors right next to each other. And then at the bottom, they all kind of pooled together like paint. And so it was just these really interesting works. And I got a chance to actually meet him and then write a piece about one of his works after talking with him. And in talking with him, we found out we used a lot of the same language and thought about our own art forms very similarly. He also thinks about time and space and rhythm and actually uses drum set tracks to compose his lines and how far apart they are and that sort of thing. And so it was really fascinating talking to him. And then my work was played by a trio, and then another dance group who was going to come in the spring to do dance works in front of the same artwork heard the piece and decided to do choreography to that piece later in the spring. And all of that was also recorded by Samsung VR. And so it was just this totally crazy experience where we had live music, art, dance, and then this like 3D kind of like video of everything. And then the craziest thing about it was I talked to the art curator a little while after all this had happened, and she told me that the artist heard the piece and he now listens to that music while he paints new works. Wow. Because he just thought it was just such a good representation of it. And so I can't think of any higher compliment as a composer doing something like that. And it was such a unique and such an awesome experience. And I want to have more of that in my career. And I just think there's something so much more dynamic and so much more involved and bigger. And I really love the feeling of intimacy you get with those communities, the audience members, and those kinds of settings that I don't always get from a concert hall. And so I tend to focus on these kinds of experiences rather than doing bigger like orchestral works or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's so incredible. Oh my God, there were so many elements to that. Was it music, art, VR? That's incredible. I'm so glad. VR, yeah. But that's amazing. Thank you so much, Kim. And everyone should check out her site and all of her different projects. It's definitely a plethora of amazing musical and artistic works.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this. Can you tell us a bit about your musical upbringing?
Sure. I grew up in a musical household. My mom's a mezzo-soprano. My dad played percussion growing up. I started piano lessons at age 6, which is my main instrument. And my parents played all types of music growing up, classical, jazz, pop, rock. So I've had a very eclectic musical foundation. In 7th grade, I picked up drum set, but I also joined choir. One of the unique things is I went to an arts magnet school for grades 6 through 12 called the Vancouver School of Arts and Academics, and had the privilege to have a fabulous choir teacher named Margaret Green, who really helped foster my love for vocal music through the eclectic mix of music she programmed, which spanned from classical, jazz, folk, gospel, and like music from more cultures. The interesting thing is, while we did a lot of like score reading, she would also actually teach us pieces orally, which is such a different way of thinking about music and kind of relating to how it's done in other cultures where they don't have formally notated music. another unique aspect of that experience at the Vancouver School of Arts and Academics is we had a class called Interdisciplinary Core, which was this class where we created art, where we combined academics. So that process really fostered my love of actually writing programmatic music. And so like whenever I'm approaching a piece, even if it's vocal, it's like, oh, what's the programmatic element? Even if I have a text, it's like there's something else outside the music that's underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
no, that's amazing. That was amazing. Sorry, go on, please.
Yeah, one of the experiences that was really key was for my junior project, I did a setting for SATV choir of the poem In Flanders Fields by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. And having that experience writing for choir was like, just kind of really solidified, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to write for singers because it's so powerful to have them be able to deliver the text. And it kind of set the stage for my focus in my undergrad and master's at Western Oregon University.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. No, thank you. I'm almost like I'm almost jealous about how art was so in your primary education, and even that the experience of often annotated music. That reminds me of when I was talking to Nicole about like working with dancers and stuff, and how like you know, for us who've been trained in like, you know, super like notation, suddenly like, right. Oh, what? Improvise what? Listening?
Yeah, I know. Exactly. It's like classical musicians improvising. I mean, oh God. They weren't doing it hundreds of years ago, but now we've lost that art.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of programmatic music, that's something that I really, really love about your writing, is that you make like your emotion and you make ideas so tangible. Like you don't just name drop things. You're not like, oh, this is about social justice or blah. Like you really dive deep down into what you want to write about, and you use the capabilities of the voice in order to speak your truth. And I think it's so well done. I mean, I've seen it in your tiny work for me, vulnerability. It truly feels vulnerable, and I feel like I'm using like my entire voice to talk about like very specific things in such a short piece. It's amazing. Can you tell us a bit about your process in writing vulnerability?
Yeah, so vulnerability was written as a cathartic emotional response to Yoga with Adrian's Yoga for Vulnerability practice. I began visualizing these emotions as auditory stems because I'm also a composer with autism, and I find that the use of those repeating ideas and motives in my compositional process as I'm like working through them as a form of stimming, and I'm guided very intuitively. So it's like, well, how does this make me feel in my body? If I'm like can physicalize it and feel grounded, then I know I'm on the right track. So the music and the poetry were composed directly in tandem with each other. And one of the themes that I tend to explore in music is meditation and its close relationship to the breath. So I really seek to evoke emotions that reflect the texture we're painting. So a big example of that is on the word vulnerability in there, I very intentionally put that one microtonal ornament so that you create a moment where the singer truly feels vulnerable beyond singing alone. It's because I wanted to create an opportunity for someone to fail by not singing that note correctly. What's interesting about this process was writing for someone who has perfect pitch as opposed to someone who has really good relative pitch. The other thing I thought a lot about was how the primary audience of a lot of music has changed. It's not so much that it's for an audience. I've been noticing that I've been writing more for performers as the audience, and has the listeners as very much a secondary audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's so interesting. And actually, to go back to that like in your song with vulnerability, even though like, yeah, I have perfect pitch, but that moment does feel vulnerable, especially because it's like such a leap, and like there's a register change. I remember like practicing that, like before I recorded it was just like with vulnerability. So I feel a little bit justified, but yeah, no, it's amazing that you set that with a sense of vulnerability, kind of like what David was talking about a bit with his piece. So you're telling me that vulnerability led to your current project, Dead Fires Anthology, and I'm so glad that this led to like a larger thing. Can you tell us more about this project?
Yeah, so the Dead Fires Anthology is a zine anthology of works that are able to be performed by one person. Most of the works in this anthology are for solo unaccompanied voice, but 2 of the works are actually self-accompanied. Twilight Blooming, which is a bossa nova vocalese, includes a body percussion part, and then I set poet Carolyn Quick's poem There's Frost, and I've included the piano part. The thing that I loved about this project is this has provided me an opportunity to collaborate with so many wonderful singers, including Stephanie. It's been a lot of fun to write for a specific singer's instrument and tailor it to the voice. One of my favorite collaborations so far has been with Carolyn Quick, because not only did I work closely with her on my setting of the poem Dead Fires, where I combined both of our interpretations of the text, but I'm also planning to set 3 of her own poems, There Is Frost, Centering, and Riots. With the Dead Fires Anthology, I really wanted to tap into solo and accompanied rep, because I feel like there's a gap in literature and it's safe for singers to work on in quarantine. And like I said, in vulnerability, is like, been thinking about it, it's like, oh, the performer's the audience, not the listeners. And I hope that for singers who I didn't specifically write for, that they can come to the Dead Fires Anthology as a tool to work through and express the individual and collective emotions that we have been feeling as a society this year.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there are going to be tons of singers who can definitely relate to the text, relate to the music, and I think that with your collaborative efforts to really tailor for these singers, like it goes a long way for us singers who feel like when we were talking about with David about like vocal consent and stuff, like
oh yeah,
it goes a long way, definitely.
Oh yeah, it's like I'm always checking in. It's like, how do you feel about singing something like this? Does this work? Working really making sure that they feel like they're part of the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. The amount of times I've like worked with people and it's like, okay, well this is like my range, this to this, and then like I get a piece and it's like just like the extremes, and I'm like, no.
That's boring.
That's not what I meant.
No. It's unhelpful. It's like really try to go and dig and all the possibilities.
Yeah,
is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Drew, thank you so much. This is super enlightening, and I'm really excited to hear more of the Dead Fires Anthology project as it develops.
Thank you.
All right, next up is a good friend of mine, Alan Theisen, who is an extraordinary saxophonist, composer, writer, everything. He's just awesome. So, Alan, can you actually tell us about your musical upbringing as well? Because I realized I was asking everyone else about it and I didn't ask you about that, so I'm asking you now.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me as a part of this, and thank you for that really kind introduction. That's really great. So yeah, my musical upbringing, actually, I grew up in a household that was not musical at all. And actually, nobody in my nuclear family or my extended family were musicians. It was just something I, for some reason, gravitated toward. And I sure wasn't involved in classical music until really my senior year of high school. That's when classical music started to click for me. And in fact, it was pretty late before I even decided I wanted music as a career. I was thinking about being an engineer or a physicist. And so right at the last possible moment, I decided, okay, well, actually, I'm going to be a band director. This would be great. So I went from physicist to band director, and I started the music ed track. And then halfway through my sophomore year of college at the University of Southern Mississippi, I decided that I don't like working with people under the age of 18. So that being a high school band director is a terrible life choice, right? Yeah, exactly. And you know, around late in high school, I really had an interest in composing my own music because although I don't come from a family of musicians, I do come from a family of people who are strong DIYers, right? And so I said, hey, I like music. I should make some myself. And so I thought to myself, okay, well, maybe I can become, pursue a career as a composer. The one and only faculty composer at the undergrad institution that I was attending was an older guy. He was asleep at the wheel. He didn't want to take any students. So I said, fine, screw it. I'll make my own path. I'll teach myself how to compose. So I spent every waking minute in the library just listening and studying scores. This thing they had to a composition degree at Southern Miss was a music history and literature degree. So I picked that up and a minor in philosophy. And then went on and did my master's and PhD in music theory at Florida State. And then did a postdoc at Indiana, music theory. So yeah, I just had the hardest time choosing between which facet of my career that I wanted to explore as a musician. For a while there, I got accepted to this institute in Italy for conducting and ended up turning it down. So in my brain, I was like, oh God, do I want to be a music historian, a music theorist, a scholar, a composer, a saxophonist, a conductor? And eventually I just got to a point where I went, okay, I'm gonna have to play long ball on this, but I just want to choose all of those paths. And that leads me to where I am today.
Wow, amazing. And yeah, and I think in today's society, like DIYers and people who like embrace all different like art segments within music are like at such an advantage, both lucratively and creatively too.
I think so. I think if you have that little bit of screw it, we'll do it live mentality,
Yeah.
I think it ends up working out really well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So more than any piece of paper or degree, I think you have to have that bit of fiery screw it spirit. You just want to go make it happen.
Yep. I wanted to ask you a bit about your duo with mezzo-soprano Megan Enan. You've been artistically together for a few years now, and the
Yes.
output you all have is a lot and amazing. Can you tell us a bit about how you two met and decided to collaborate?
Yeah, we met on Twitter. She was performing an unaccompanied voice piece of mine, a different one than the one that you'll be performing today. And she DM'd me on Twitter and said, hey, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I'm pretty sure it's Theisen. I said, yep, you're totally right. And so we just started a friendship via Twitter DM. And we met in 2016 at the New Music Gathering in Baltimore, Peabody. Got along, and I said, hey, it would be really, for years I've wanted to do something as a saxophonist, working with a vocalist. Would you like to do something sometime? She said, yeah, sure. So almost a year passes, and I said, hey, look, I'm really serious about this. In fact, would you like to do a recital together? And she said, yeah, I think that'll be fine. And I said, good, because I've already commissioned a friend of mine, and the piece came in the mail yesterday. And it's a song cycle, 4 songs dedicated to us, and we've never played a note before. And she was like, okay. I said, okay, how about this? You set up one gig, and I'll drive to you from North Carolina to Iowa. And so she said, okay, sure. And sure enough, instead of setting up one gig, she set up 4 gigs over the span of a week in like 2 different states. And so we both were like, okay, so we both have extra energy, right? We are both extra kinds of people. And so we said, well, we hope this works. And we had a couple of rehearsals. We did those gigs and just went, okay, there's something here. Let's build to this. Let's add to this. That was almost 4 years ago. It's a little under 4 years ago. And since then, I think we've had 26 pieces written for us. And we have an album coming out. We have our second touring production that's underway. So yeah, a lot of big plans. So wow. we just connected like gin and tonic.
Yep, that's fantastic. Oh my God. And it's so rare, I think, to find like a collaborator that you like truly gel with. I was thinking a little bit about this earlier. Like you can have, let's say a duo, for example, like you can have 2 talented artists, 2 good people, and they just like don't mesh, and that's just the way it is. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and it can be it could be a little heartbreaking, but like sometimes there's just like that extra magic, you know, that makes you two good collaborators.
Yeah, it's really, and you know, it's difficult to say exactly what that thing is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, sometimes two people just, you know, rehearsals are easy, and hey, I was thinking we would do this. Well, I was thinking the same thing. Great, boop, you know. And actually, it was interesting because everything was so easy up front that it was actually a couple of years into our duo before we started having our first disagreements. You know, where we didn't see eye to eye.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was interesting later on, and to kind of arrive at those moments of friction and then go, well, shit, we're 2 years into this duo. Like, okay, we have to work this out. This isn't, you know, 2 weeks into the duo. I mean, oh, maybe we're not going to work. You know, we're in it now. You know, we've already committed to doing these residencies. We've got to work through this,
right.
And we did, of course. And yeah, in fact, we have a really big rehearsal day tomorrow that we're both really looking forward to. So
oh, good! I'm so glad.
Yeah. And a recording project 3 weeks from tomorrow, hence the rehearsal.
Oh wow, that's that's great. Now before I forget, I also wanted to ask you a bit about this new journal, the Theisen journal that you recently started, and it's amazing.
Thank you.
For those who haven't read it yet, it's a weekly online periodical exploring both happenings in the broader new music community and also Alan's personal creative work as a composer, saxophonist, and theorist. And yeah, in just a few weeks, it's already become an amazing resource. So Alan, what inspired you to create this journal, and what do you hope that readers get out of it?
I hope they get the same thing out of it that prompted me to start it in the first place, which was to stop all the damn doom scrolling. I got tired of going online and just seeing constant, and look, the world's on fire. I acknowledge that. I get it. We're in it. I'm not putting my head in the sand. I'm not ostriching here. But at the same time, I was like, okay, I want to write something that's more long form, that's more tangible, that points toward, as David Byrne said, reasons to be cheerful. And so I just decided, okay, rather than going on Twitter and wearing my thumbs out by, you know, piling on with all of the doom scrolling, I said, look, I will take that same amount of time, that same amount of energy, and write something that's permanent, that's long form, that I can put out every Wednesday, that is fundamentally optimistic, that points outward, that's talking about my own creative energy and the creative energies of others. So yeah, the purpose of it was to stop me from doom scrolling, right? It's no coincidence that, you know, the first issues came out a month before the election, right? I had to stop. And so what I was getting out of it was, you know, my way of trying to give back to a new music community that over the past 20 years has just given me so much. I've had so much joy in the past 20 years. I continue to have so much joy. The new music community is absolutely incredible and diverse and beautiful, so filled up with ideas and different perspectives and energy. And I wanted to do anything I could to help shine a light back on all of these people who have shown a light on me. And so that was the whole point behind the Theisen journal. I'm having a blast. And, you know, I think we're coming up on issue number 8 next Wednesday. And I literally already have like 14 issues planned past that. And some really great content coming. And I have no intention of monetizing those Wednesdays. I want it to be available for free. I want everybody to have a chance to read and listen and explore some of the things that I'm talking about.
That's amazing. And thank you for doing that. I mean,
it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I'm having a blast.
It's one of the reasons I love the new music community so much. It's just everyone gives as much as they take. I mean, I guess not everyone, but a lot of people give as much as they take. And it's just, it's a really great community. And I feel like very supported and also very excited to collaborate with others, to help others, to listen to others. It's amazing. So thank you, Alan, so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
So now our last, but definitely not least, composer is Ian Wiese. who I met actually, when was it, a year and a half ago? I was singing with Rose Hegley for a Peridot Duo concert, and Ian had a piece being performed by Box Not Found.
Yeah, that was at Cornelia Street Cafe, I think.
Yeah.
And then not too long after that, the place stopped existing.
Yeah. Oh, God, that was sad. Oh man. But anyway, we're still here.
Yes.
So Ian, can you tell us a bit about your musical upbringing?
All right. So when I was back in Jersey, right now I'm in Massachusetts right now. I participated in my school band programs. You know, they put an instrument in your hand, except they first shoved a trumpet in my hand, and I said no, I didn't like it. So they shoved the euphonium in my hand, and I said yes. From there, I played in the school bands for a number of years, you know, playing the basic euphonium parts and things. If anybody's ever played in bands, they're not particularly robust because it's the euphonium. And then I went to the even more robust instrument called the tuba, where you literally have quarter notes the entire time.
Oh my gosh.
High school. So, but that was when in high school I started getting a little more serious with all this. I started taking a lot more private lessons. There was actually another composer at my school, Jeff Sabo, who I'll continue more with him because he actually factors in quite heavily into what I did. He directed me because he knew I was interested in some composition to his private teacher. So I started taking lessons with his private teacher before I went out and did some summer programs. And from there, it kept building and building and building up until I actually was able to write a couple of choral pieces of the school's director, Leslie McPherson. She was so great. She opened up the school's choir programs to let me compose them. I think I wrote like 6 pieces, and I had 3 of them done on different concerts, including one of Walt Disney World.
What? That's amazing.
Yeah, we did those band trips, and they took one of my pieces down to Walt Disney World, premiered right outside the Imagination Pavilion.
Wow, that's incredible.
I think I've lost the score to that since, though, unfortunately.
Oh no, so it only remains in the Magic Kingdom.
It remains only an Epcot Center, floating in the airwaves outside Imagination. Yeah, from there I applied actually to Ithaca College, where Jeff Sabo also went. I kind of followed him. I figured, well, he's got his stuff down. I might as well at least continue going on that direction. At least it might provide me a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I went through all of Ithaca until I applied to New England Conservatory, got in there for my master's. Mm-hmm. And from there, it's just been ever since. Now I'm getting my doctorate there during this time.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Which is funny because as other people are saying they come from musical backgrounds or non-musical backgrounds, I sort of came from a slightly musical background. Mm-hmm. My mother was not musical at all. My grandmother could play My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose on the piano by ear because she's Scottish. And my father fancied him, I use the term father loosely, fancied himself a guitarist. Mm-hmm. He was able to play through a couple of Jethro Tull tunes. Mm-hmm. Never bothered trying to finish anything in his life.
Oh, geez.
Until eventually I started taking it up and did, I think, pretty well at it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you know, I have sort of like a partial like musical upbringing thing. My sister is a cellist. My parents are not musicians, but they like music a lot and they listen to classical music. But yeah, it feels a little bit like piecemeal. We don't know where talent comes from. But
yeah, it's one of those nebulous things that just appears in somebody.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I kind of relate to you in that you followed your acquaintance his path for composition. That was me with my sister. My sister is a couple years older, and she went to Juilliard, and I thought like, oh, you can do that? Oh, okay. And I mean, I did not get into Juilliard. I'm fine. No, but I ended up going to music conservatory. I know it's a lot.
I applied to Juilliard and didn't get in either way. So.
We're not mad.
Actually, I view it not getting into Juilliard as one of the best things to happen because I got in NEC.
Oh, right. It's an incredible program.
So now I'm here in Boston, roots firmly planted, and really good program.
Yeah, fantastic. And Boston's such a hot spot for new music.
Yeah, there are now more ensembles in Boston per capita than there are in New York City.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's a great statistic. Makes me feel proud to be a Bostonian. I'm gonna go on real quick. But yeah, one of the things I admire about you is your commitment to engaging with the community. You just mentioned that you have your feet planted, and it shows in your work. Especially your creativity now and enthusiasm now in a time that's pretty dark for us. Oh God, 2020.
Say that again.
And you've written a lot during the pandemic, and particularly for virtual collaborations, which have been such like a light in the darkness. I enjoyed your piece for Sputterbox especially. And then, as you mentioned, you're completing your doctorate during the pandemic, which, I mean, honestly, doing anything in the pandemic, I can't even. But how has doing all of this affected your compositional voice?
Well, I don't know how much necessarily all of this has affected my compositional voice in so far that it's like changed the way I compose. It just sort of made me do more of it, I guess. And by doing that, I guess maybe I refined what I even wanted to say further, just by the process of doing more. Because I think I've been tallying periodically however many times I've been doing this. I think I'm up to now like 17 pieces during the pandemic, and most of which have either been performed solo pieces or there's that one thing I wrote for Load Bang as part of Divergent Studio.
Yeah.
If you've heard that one. Or they're just stuff that's to be ready when it comes back, like a full wind ensemble piece, like 13 minutes long, ready to go. I viewed it as a situation mostly where it's like, I have two choices. Either I could do what I'm doing and do it more, or do less of what I'm doing and do it less. So with the time that I have, and I'm not having as much in terms of school work because we're all on Zoom and getting Zoom fatigued, I figured, well, plus I didn't actually have my summer job to help make money, but such as things are, I decided that it would be best to just keep writing. And thankfully, my teacher, John Heist, decided that because he was paid for a number of coachings and chamber ensembles that he didn't actually end up, he would take the money that he had and give the time that he was being paid for to his composition students.
That's amazing. That's incredibly generous.
Yeah, so the entire time we were in this, including summer, I was still actively composing with my teacher, like it was like nothing had changed except for being on Zoom.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you had that support. And to what you said earlier, it's I mean, it's a very privileged thing to find like any honestly any like positive side to the pandemic or whatever. But that aside, I'm glad that I guess with all of the pandemic took away, it really lit up like your truth in your writing. You're like, well, I know that this is my voice in my writing. Less distractions. I'm going to focus on that, and that itself is wonderful. And what a great opportunity, in such a dark time.
Yeah, I mean, it can be considered privileged to be able to just sit down and continue what you're doing, but I also viewed it as a way, almost like a new opportunity, because suddenly everything else had gone away. I wasn't able to work. I luckily had the support to be able to be at home and mostly function.
Yeah.
But I had all the other stuff kind of stripped away and was left with this opportunity. So I just said, you know what? I could either sit and do nothing, or I could sit and do something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I feel the same way with my singing, and I didn't mean to insinuate that you or any of us are privileged or anything, but it's at least like for me, like in thinking about like the world, it's like, yeah, it took a minute for me to be like, no, like art is what I do. This is how I contribute to the world. Like, it is okay. It is good. It is meaningful, even though the world is on fire.
Well, because let's not forget that even though the world is on fire right now, it's not going to be on fire forever. It will eventually be put out.
That's true. That's definitely true.
So it's a way for you. I mean, also, thankfully, I was able to get into some programs, like recently just got out of the Heartland Marimba Quartet Composition Festival, or I got into writing for the solo instrument with composer Jenny Brandon out of, I think she's in LA right now. I don't quite remember. Sorry, Jenny, if you see this. But it just, there's also opportunities still out there for those who want to get involved and want to keep doing it. It's a little harder, sure. But, the music still is going on, thankfully.
Yeah, definitely. Now, another cool thing that I wanted to talk about, and another facet of how you engage with the new music community, is by means of music journalism. You write for the Boston Music Intelligencer. How did you get into music journalism, and how do you hope to shape our community in that route?
So that's a bit of a fun story, if you're willing to hear that out.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, there's an ensemble in Boston called Boston Musica Viva that was once helmed by Dick Pittman until he recently had, I think, a stroke and had to give it up. But I think one of the oldest PRO ensembles still working in the United States. In fact, actually, my composition teacher was the founding flutist for that ensemble.
Wow.
Yeah, so I frequently would, thanks to NEC's direct connection with BMV, I decided that, paying $5 a ticket would be very easy to go. So I went to a concert they were holding in Blangy. So I was sitting in the audience, everything was normal, until I got approached by Bettina Norton, the emeritus editor that I didn't know at the time, for BMI, BMINS, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. BMI is something else. And she said, "Hi, I've been told that you are a composer." And I said, "Yes." I was thinking maybe she thought maybe I was on the program. Mm-hmm. But then she said, "Would you like to write a review for this concert for the Boston Music Intelligencer?" And I looked around a little bit confused and I said, "Sure." Turns out actually she had contacted Scott Wheeler, another composer in the Boston area who teaches at Emerson. And he was there in the audience. He couldn't do it, but he recommended me because he knew me from Aaron Larche Kaplan's new Lullaby project. And since I was there, it was really easy to just have us connect. So I reviewed that concert, learned exactly how to phrase certain things, because that very first review, if you saw the original draft of it, I needed to tone some of my language down. And then from there, I just started doing more and more of it, because at the time I was living actually at the NEC dorms. Mm-hmm. So I was able to go to concerts quite frequently. And I just said, well, if I'm going to be in the area, I'm going to be actively doing stuff, I might as well, keep doing this. And so I kept reviewing for the Intelligencer for a number of years. I'm still technically part of it now, although being in Quincy, it's a little harder to get into the city and to do concert reviews, just because there's a bit of a hike on the red line. I haven't done one in a little while, except for the virtual ones. And the piece I wrote actually about your project, the Tiny Works for Quarantine. Mm-hmm. But I view it as a way to at least provide some feedback to the community, to give up. There's like 2 or 3 new music people at BMINS. There's myself, Rachel Fuller, and then every now and then you get somebody like Mark Devoto who wants to do a new music concert. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it's a way to just provide some feedback to everybody, to say, hey, yeah, I guess sort of speaking for the community, but not speaking for the community at large, because, we can't represent everyone and everyone's tastes. Mm-hmm. But it's a way to at least say, hey, I think this is working, this is not working as well. Mm-hmm. You're doing this great, maybe you need to work on this a little bit. Just a way to provide at least a little bit of developmental feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's super important, especially like when audiences like don't know what to go to, or even like what to listen for at concerts. I find music criticism is extremely important, not only in being like what's good, what's bad, but just shedding light on music that you may not have like even thought to listen to before. It really it develops our community as a whole. It's great.
Yeah, and it also, being that the term new music is very broad, it means that you can attend a lot of concerts and be able to specifically go for the new stuff. Like I was one of the 2 BMINT reviewers for the Cerise Jacobs and Julian Watchner, I think it was, mm-hmm. Rev 23 with Whitesnake. Mm-hmm. If you remember that from a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think I reviewed it one time. I think I did a piece on the Burke and Blair one, or the Burke and Hare that the BLO did. Mm-hmm. I think so. Or at least maybe I did write that, and then it may or may not have been published. I don't quite remember. Mm-hmm. But, it's a way to get around and just provide useful information to everybody. Mm-hmm. Because new music is such a big pool to jump into. There's so many people doing so many different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that, you know, much like I guess Robert Schumann was doing in his day, just a way to at least provide people some information, filter out, you know, what we think is going to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm so glad that you're doing the good work, you know, and putting spotlight on us musicians. It's great.
Thank you. I got to do it more, I got to say, but you know, when it's 40 minutes in and 40 minutes out on the red line.
Yeah, it could be a trip. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ian, for your time.
Just before we go on, I wanted to at least, I know we haven't really been showing us the inside of the place, but I want to show you the view out of the window that's right in front of me because it's really pretty.
Okay.
You know,
yeah.
This is totally not connected to the interview at all.
That's
but
fine.
I like showing this.
Oh my goodness. Oh, the water. Oh, I'm so jealous. Wow, that's really beautiful. And it must be so nice to do your work with that view.
Yeah, because this is my composition workstation, so I get to view this nice bit of water out in the Atlantic.
That's great. Yeah, no, now like workspace at home has become like much more important. Yeah, like since the pandemic, I was like, guess I'll get a desk now. Now some lights. But that's so great. I'm so glad that you have that view. Well, thank you so much, Ian. So now we have Something About Isolation by Kim Osberg. I am reaching. I am reaching out to which, if you know me, if you God, just let me have you. And now we have Vulnerability by Drew Swatosh. I breathe in. I breathe out. Weight of my soul's grounds through the earth. My heart's face opens anew. Waiting through emotions deep and complex with vulnerability. next we have Ich kreise Gott by Alan Theisen. Ich kreise Gott den uralten Tod und ich und ich weiß noch nicht, bin ich ein Falker, ein Sturm. And finally, we have I Am, I Was by Ian Wiese. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you all who participated in these interviews. It was amazing to have these conversations with you. It's amazing to be able to perform your works again. And thank you for writing these works. Honestly, this project and your musicianship really kept me afloat during the pandemic, and my eternal gratitude to you all. So yeah, thank you all so much. I'll see you in the real world, hopefully soon.